Good afternoon. Good afternoon. We would like to continue to the session with the last panel of the first day. It's an important subject. We will discuss plagiarism and authorship issues. You know our speakers. I would like to introduce myself. I am the Vice Rector of Trakya University and also Council member of European Association of Science Editors. I was the Associate Editor and Editor-in-Chief and Editor-at-Large of Balkan Medical Journal. I am at the Committee of the Scientific and Technological Research Council of Turkey at TR Index. I am also a member of COP-WAME, Council of Science Editors and EAS. I am a professor at Trakya University, Faculty of Medicine, and also the General Secretary of Balkan Society of Otorhinolaryngology and Neck Surgery. I or any member of my family have no commercial relationship with any publisher or any kind of publishing or journal-related person or company. There are some facts related to publication ethics. In the recent years, submissions from Balkan countries to international journals published in English have significantly increased. However, authors' English language is not sufficient, and there is a pressure to publish in international science citation index journals for academic career. But the quantity becomes more important than quality. On the other hand, authorship and citation training is not adequate. So all of those result increase in scientific and publication misconduct in our region. In 2011, Paul White, the co-editor of Anesthesia and Analgesia, gave a lecture in Istanbul, and he showed that table during his presentation. And when we look at this table, Turkey is almost the first country regarding the plagiarized texts at submissions to that journal. So it's an important problem in our country, but also in Balkan region, it's also a big problem. For example, Bazaric and her colleagues published a study in 2012, and they searched for text similarities among submissions, and they have found that manuscripts with plagiarism were most commonly from China, Turkey, and Croatia. And especially the plagiarized text was most commonly at the materials and methods section. This was also an interesting point. We have organized in 2015 a panel here at Trakya University with the subject how to decrease publication misconduct in the Balkans. Professor Marisic and the research integrity editor Dr. Bazaric from Croatian Medical Journal and editor-in-chief of Hippocratia and I from Balkan Medical Journal attended this panel. Numerous panels like this have done until now, and we are still continuing to discussing these subjects. And today, I think it will be useful also for you, for researchers in our region, to make clear some subjects. Now I would like to invite Ms. Pippa Smart to give her speech.
Thank Thank you very much. And actually, I'd like to start with a presentation of some research I've done recently, which actually has some interesting changes to... However,
it's
not I don't think I will be starting with a presentation because it doesn't appear to be there.
Which
okay,
one?
Not to worry. I won't start with a presentation. That's not a problem. I undertook some research in the summer, a survey of journal editors to ask about their experience of plagiarism. And we received a reasonable number of 12 editors reply from Europe, 119 from Asia, and about 57 from North America, most of whom were from the USA. And our findings were, our research question was, is plagiarism as bad as everybody thinks it is? And our survey actually found out that it wasn't as bad as everyone thinks it is. So we're taking interesting positions on this subject, I think, here. So for our research, we found that between different disciplines and different regions, the incidence of plagiarism was between 2 and 5% of submitted articles from the people that we had surveyed. However, we started the survey by asking them what percentage of submissions did they think was plagiarized. And they said, on average, 10%. But those that had experienced plagiarized submissions reported that they thought 18% of all submissions were plagiarized. And so from this, what we found was that people's perception of plagiarism was worse than their actual experience of plagiarism. And when we looked at the type of plagiarism that people were experiencing, most of it was what we would call text duplication rather than overtly fraudulent plagiarism. So the majority of it was copying of small sections or parts of an article, and it was largely due to language problems and language concerns. So it was an interesting piece of research. I don't claim it was definitive at all. It provided a snapshot of experience between the survey participants. But the one thing it said to me was that people often think that plagiarism is worse than it is. And I'd like to ask, perhaps start with Anna, about, as an editor of a journal, your experience of plagiarism.
Actually, I have some data that... Better? Because you said in the Turkey was that you showed that slide.
In 2011.
And now it is, Turkey is on the 8th place or something.
It's getting better.
So it's getting better, and that's because there is research on plagiarism in Turkey. Some time ago, we did a Cochrane review on interventions to reduce research misconduct and promote research integrity. And one of the things that we looked at was also plagiarism. So whether there are interventions to decrease plagiarism. And out of all, so we looked at all other things, anything that relates to research integrity, authorship, falsification, fabrication, ethical behavior, and so on. And we looked at really lots of papers, and because there is sporadic evidence about that. And we, from the evidence that is available, and it is like a high-quality evidence, systematic clinical trials, randomized trials, or controlled before and after studies, we could see that only interventions directed at students practicing how to write so they don't plagiarize by using the IT tool. Other sentences, tools. It was a whether it's a lasting effect, because there are no studies that followed it, what happens to these students when they leave university and some of them start doing research, but at least what we know works is related to the reduction of plagiarism. And as far as I remember, there were a number of studies on this, and I think sorry, I have a cold, and two of them came from Turkey. So there is effort in Turkey to teach students how not to plagiarize and how to write well, that they write their own words. So this is a good. My experience as a journal editor is that this was a tricky thing, and the smaller journals, this was in Croatian Medical Journal, that we introduced the checking of all manuscripts in cross-ref. So we check, cross-check. So we check everything, and we actually, Cem mentioned Professor Ksenia Baždarić, it was her PhD thesis. So we nominated a research integrity editor, and it was a young person, and her PhD thesis and test different ways of testing for plagiarism and to analyze what the problems are and what we can do in a journal about this. And our experience is that what Pippa and I think that the role of journal editors is to be educators first. Because this is how we, I don't know, how else can I write a paper? We had a paper we had to retract where an author did an admirable thing because he replicated a study from another country. So he said, let me do the study in Croatia. He got his own original results, and in the study he just kind of erased the previously published paper from another country and replaced it with his numbers and left the text as it is, with a little bit of addition in the discussion section about what happens in Croatia. So the research was valid, but he was inexperienced, and this is what he wrote in his letter that kind of announced the correction of this paper, that good in English. He didn't the language that was good. So.
And I think that raises a very important point about plagiarism, is that if you are knowledgeable as a researcher or as a journal editor, you have a very fixed idea of what plagiarism is and what is acceptable and not acceptable. But researchers, and particularly in different parts of the world, will have a different understanding of what is acceptable and not, and will not necessarily know or understand what they are allowed to do and not allowed to do. I had an example myself with an article that was submitted to me from China, and I put the article through cross-check and it came up with nothing, but I put the abstract into Google, and Google found that the article had been published in Chinese in a Chinese journal, but they had used an English abstract as well as the Chinese abstract, and so I could tell it was the same article and the figures were the same. So I contacted the author to say, this is plagiarism because you've not mentioned this, and she came back and said, but it's a different article, it's now in English. But that makes it a different article. And I said, but it's the same research. And she honestly didn't understand. And so what I said was, because we were already reviewing the article by the time I checked this, and it was a very good article, and it was good research. Now, I can't read Chinese, and most of our readership can't read Chinese. So it is completely valid to publish it in English as well as Chinese, because that research is valuable to people. And so we agreed that we would publish it, but what we required from her, because of copyright and ownership, is for her to obtain permission from the publishers of the journal in which she'd originally published it in China. And that came to us within about 4 or 5 days. We got a signed letter with the university stamp saying that they gave permission, which of course it's in their interest to give permission, because their article is now cited in the English language article. So the author has got 2 articles out of 1 piece of research and 2 citations, potentially. And both journals are happy because we're getting cross-cited. So everybody's happy, but for everybody to be happy, it needs to be completely transparent that this article was first published in this journal. So there's no problem as long as we get transparency. But the author had not understood. She had a completely different understanding of what plagiarism was. And because it was her work, she didn't see a problem. I wonder, Cem, if you've got some thoughts.
Can I continue with this subject? You know that Miguel Roy from United States is one of the experts in publication ethics, and he found in one of his studies, which was published at European Science Editing, that there is a lack of agreement in plagiarism definition and in the threshold of acceptable text recycling. Some editors find it acceptable to reuse some material while others discourage any form of reuse. So in this aspect, I would like to ask you, how can we find the right way? How can we protect ourselves? Because in some journals, the editor may find it unacceptable or may reject our paper, or can take some measures about an author and accuse for plagiarism. But in some journals, for example, reusing same material or same text at the materials and methods section. What can you say about this?
If I can go first. The problem is here actually that, editors are busy people. They receive so many manuscripts, they have to make decisions. They are very often not professional editors, but, academics who work as editors too. And we would like to have some kind of a magic number or threshold to say, okay, everything above 18% is plagiarism, everything that is 18% or below is not plagiarism. But you cannot do that. 18.1% doesn't mean that it's plagiarized, and 18% is not plagiarized. Unfortunately, you have to look at each and every paper, and even the number that you get as a number from a tool like crosscheck is not a definitive. You can have 30% text identity, but it may be in method section, so you really have to see where it is and what it means. For me, only if somebody takes whole paragraphs of text from another paper, I would consider that a plagiarism. But, professional researchers of plagiarisms like Miguel Roy, they would say 6 words that are the same in 2 texts, that's considered plagiarism. But look at scientific paper. If you say, the effect of interleukin-1 on mRNA expression of this gene, it's already 10 words. And there is no other way that you can say it in a technical language. So these professionals on plagiarism say, you have to use a variety. You don't have to say cardiac arrest, but say heart stoppage. But, I would flunk my student if he starts using words like cardiac stoppage instead of cardiac arrest, which is a heart stoppage instead of cardiac arrest, which is a professional term, because in science you have specific language that we use, which is then becomes, you have these big phrases that are used all over the place. It's also very difficult sometimes in social sciences and philosophy, if you're talking about, what some other researcher said or philosopher, your whole paper would be full of quotations if you would have to exactly say what they did. And if you try to kind of re-say or reformulate it, it's again very similar to that what the actual person said. Of course, it would be better that you use a citation next to it, regardless of how you kind of re-say what the other person says. So I don't think, Cem, that there is a unique or unified answer for every journal, field, or paper, that each case is individual, and we as editors have to see what we want our role to be. I don't think it, at this moment, has to be that of policing, but more of education and giving direction to people. And in many cases, you would get a paper from the journal saying, look, we have found these text similarities. Of course, they are not gross. I mean, it's underlines, not too much. Can you rewrite these sentences? Which I think helps authors to learn and to improve their paper. I don't think that punishment or rejection serves purpose if the research is good.
I would like to continue. It is obvious that such paper cannot be accepted. This was the highest similarity percentage of my experience. 97% was the similarity index. Only the author's names were changed. There is no discussion about such cases. And the same author submit 11 manuscripts in 1 month, and 7 of them includes verbatim text composing from 50% to 94%. And we have taken measures regarding the COP guidelines, and this author was answering from his position in the university. And so this is a serious thing, but there are some discussed points. For example, this is my opinion that the lack of consensus in definition of plagiarism or universal guidance means that authors from developing countries and for whom English is not their mother tongue might be at high risk of technical plagiarism through the use of material that does not contain data or intellectual property. What do you think about this, Pipa? Do you agree?
I agree totally, and I think there's a few issues here. One issue is that journal editors have a responsibility to make it clear in their guidelines what is acceptable and what is not. The problem is that a lot of editors, particularly in the high-profile journals, feel that they don't need to make their guidelines clear because there is an uneven power balance, and because they are so busy, they are looking to reject articles to only select the best, and plagiarism or duplication is a reason for rejection. Authors also, though, have a responsibility to be transparent about where they get the content from. So, for example, to say, this article was already published in Chinese, or the materials and methods section was already published in a previous article, but this is a new analysis of the data, or that we obtained this data from that point. So there is a responsibility of authors themselves to be transparent, but there is a responsibility for editors to be transparent. There is another issue, though, that comes into play here, and it was interesting that you mentioned intellectual property. Copyright and intellectual property laws around the world are different. And within the majority of the world, the perception of intellectual property rights is more of a moral integrity right. So that if I write something, most countries, that is respected in terms of it being my own expression of myself. And therefore it's my property in terms of the moral right that I have for that content not to be misused. But in Western Europe, particularly UK and the USA, the perception of intellectual property right is more of a commercial right. So as an author, there's more emphasis on your commercial right to make money or to make profit out of your own content, so your own articles. That's not always in money, it's in tenure and promotion. So the editors in the West would see it as, if you're replicating somebody's phrasing, they would see that as theft from a commercial as well as a moral perspective. Whereas for the majority of the world, reproducing somebody's phrasing would not necessarily be considered as unethical, because you're not reproducing their their ideas, you're just reproducing their expression, and that has less gravitas in most of the world, but it has very high gravitas in the USA, which is where most of the high impact factor journals are based. So you're getting an imbalance there over perception and cultural understanding of what plagiarism is.
Thank you. Even a short course in science ethics had a great impact on the attendees' responsible conduct of research. Anna, what do you think? You have mentioned previously, but I would like to ask you again. Do you believe that education in science ethics is useful to prevent misconduct? And what do you suggest institutions how can take corrective actions to prevent such misconduct?
Unfortunately, the evidence is not there to support, what works and what doesn't work. In the systematic review, so we looked at really the high quality evidence which comes from testing interventions, randomized trials, or at least in controlled before and after studies. We couldn't find any impact of teaching other interventions except for plagiarism. But then again, it's very, people measure, we couldn't do much because people measure different things. What do you consider a success of research ethics training? Because when you look at educational research, you can look at different levels. You can ask people, are you satisfied with this course? And everybody will say yes, but it doesn't tell you much. You can look at their attitudes, opinions, but that also doesn't mean that they're going to do that. You can look at their intention to change. They say, okay, from now on, I'm not going to cheat, I'm going to do everything responsible. That also doesn't mean that they actually are going to change. And the best way to measure this is to measure change in behavior. But that's a long-term study, it's very difficult to measure, so we don't know how these things work and whether they actually work on behavior, whether they change behavior. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't continue. And some evidence from not such stringent methodological approaches shows that this is useful. And I think, again, I would like to look at it as a kind of a preventive measure. Look at your university and say, what do we have in place to promote good behavior and protect plagiarism? Are our students informed when they enlist a course? And it has been shown from other research in business ethics that if students sign a code of honor before they're doing a test, they cheat less than when they don't sign. Even in the United States, there was a study when they have to remember the 10 Commandments from the Bible before writing this test, that they would cheat less than those students that were not asked to try to remember the 10 Commandments. So there are many different ways how you can influence people, and mostly because we are irrational. So it's important that you have this nudging of people to do good things. But that, you have to start with codes, with transparencies, with processes, what is good and what is bad at your university. What students know about cheating and the best behavior in learning. What your PhD students know. Do they know who owns the data, what they do with their data? Do you have, in the era of electronic data, do you have safe repositories? Do you have a data protection officer? All of these things are important to provide an environment in which students will learn what is best. Unfortunately, especially because I come from a post-communist country, especially in our countries, corruption is a way of life. And there have been studies from my colleagues who show that students come to the university prepared to cheat, because this was their modus operandi from primary school. So how to change this? So it's a much bigger issue, but if you don't start from yourself and your institution and making clear guidance, or at least have it somewhere that you can say, yes, this is what you were supposed to do, because very often people don't know what is good and what is bad.
Roy published 28 guidelines to avoid plagiarism. And I would like to mention some important ones. Guideline 2, any verbatim text taken from another source must be enclosed in quotation marks and be accompanied by a citation to indicate its origin. Here is an example. Gratz has written in 2006 that it is important that you understand the word you are using in your writing. If another author writes these sentences in his or her paper, like copy-paste, and that is plagiarism, we know. But what about, let's think that it is something related with the methods section. Can he write it directly like that at the methods section?
Probably yes. I mean, this is one of the real difficulties with plagiarism, is that it is to do with context, not the number of words. So as Anna said before, if you do a plagiarism check and it says 20% of this article has been published elsewhere, that might be okay. But if it says 10% has been published elsewhere, that might not be okay because of the type of the words that have been changed. So if, you know, the example that I give, which is not scientific, is if I publish in my article, "The sun rises in the west," and then Anna publishes "The sun rises in the west," because it's so general, I couldn't possibly capture that and say that's my intellectual property, you're stealing it. But if I was to phrase it in a very particular poetical or literate way, then that would be plagiarism. So, yeah, even this. Sentence? Yeah, placed like this here, these one sentences are probably okay, but when they're isolated like this, they look much more dramatic. And so it becomes much more nuanced about what is wrong plagiarism and what is just laziness and what is acceptable. And there is a gradient.
But it's better not to accept this sentence. Let's say we put a reference at the behind, and it is the same sentence. What do you think about this sentence?
Yeah. Theoretically, you're still, quoting exact words of a person. So this should go into quotation marks. Just putting a reference on somebody else's words is not proper. But again, this is only for one sentence. But if it were a whole paragraph where you're not citing or you're copying a whole paragraph and then saying Graz 2006, that would be wrong for me. For me, even of a problem. Although theoretically, what you should do is put the quotation mark and a citation. But for one sentence, and if it's the only sentence in the work that you're looking at, yeah, it would be fine. So we cannot police everything. It's not like it's kind of ruining the whole.
However, this is not acceptable.
I know, but I said it's not acceptable, and the proper way is what you're going to click now.
What can you say if we use the same sentence in a material method section from another author?
Yeah. I think it would probably be better to say, Gratz said, it is important you understand the work you are using in your writing, close quotation mark, Gratz 2006. That would be the perfect way of doing it.
What about if the author was Gratz himself? Can he use the same sentence in his next paper?
I would say
with a reference or without a reference?
I would say yes, and as an author I would say yes, especially because I would add a citation to my own work to get another citation. So it's always good to cite your own work, not too much.
But it is still unacceptable by some of the editors, And for example, if you write like this, I think
that's fine.
Yeah,
that's fine.
But again, I think it's going over the board for one sentence. For a paragraph, I would say yes, but for one sentence,
what is the limit of putting quotation marks? How many sentences can we use in a paper?
I would say for me two.
Two.
Because with two, it's already...
I would say it depends. If you're doing a literature review, then you would use, in quotation marks, about 50%, 60% of the paper might be reproduced from other works because you're doing a literature review and therefore you're quoting from different articles, but with your own discussion and conclusions, drawing them together. But it can easily be 50. I've had articles which are 50% copied, but they're done like this third example. So they're all properly cited, and the author has added enough new content.
The question is, what is this new content that is added, whether it's enough? So how are you judging what is enough of the new content?
Editorial judgment.
Yeah. But again, how can I write it differently if I, for example, come from humanities or social sciences and I don't want to have all of my paper in quotations?
You have to
So
paraphrase.
how can I paraphrase this?
You have to paraphrase.
Has indicated that when you're writing a paper, it's important that you understand the work you're using. I mean,
I will show
how
you.
many different ways of paraphrasing is because, proper plagiarism is, you cannot just reshuffle, because that's again plagiarism. You have to use completely new words. And that requires good knowledge of the language that you don't know, actually.
This example was taken in a book on paraphrasing and plagiarism, and there is another example. We paraphrase this sentence like that. Is that a proper paraphrase, Pippa?
To me, it's fine. To me, it's fine, but I know there is an issue over paraphrasing. And the problem is I shouldn't be sitting on this panel because I have no problem with people paraphrasing. But I know at some universities they're very strong on it, saying you're still stealing someone's idea.
Unfortunately, this is not acceptable.
I hereby resign my editorship of Learned Publishing.
This sentence, some words were changed, and tense was changed, but it is not still enough.
Okay, let's see what is enough.
And now, what is your opinion about this sentence? The same sentence, but a different way, right?
I think this is terrible English.
But I think that this is not the same what the guy said. It's a bit different because this is reference papers, understanding of the reference papers that you quote. And to understand the work you are using in your writing, I may not quote everything and it still be work that I'm using in my writing. I may decide, to cut down from 200 references I have in my PhD to 50. And that's all the work that I used in my writing, but not for references. So, to me, these are two different messages.
This might still be considered
really?
unacceptable by some experts.
I would say it's unacceptable from a language perspective. and also, if you're being specific, it says papers. Those works might not be papers.
Exactly.
They might be books, they might be websites.
If you write like this, it might be acceptable in author's opinion.
But it's not a short sentence.
And I will show the later one. This is certainly an acceptable paraphrase of this sentence.
Again, I say these are two different statements. Now, one is about work that you use, and the other is about literature that you cite. To me, these are two different.
But you see that why I showed those examples, you see that some editors can think like this, and how difficulties we can have as a non-English speaking people.
Because for me, the author of this book has changed a very straightforward sentence into into something that's in the passive tense, it's difficult to read, it's long, it's not clear. And so I think the language is poor that they're suggesting. But I know it is an issue, and to a certain extent, when you're dealing with students, you need to be, you need to set the rules more firmly than they may be enforced in real life post-student, because you need to instill in them the absolute right and wrong. And as you get older and you get more experienced, you learn when you can modify the rules a little bit.
Yes. This is a common example of technical plagiarism, which I experienced during my editorship. You see up the text with technical plagiarism. It was taken from the paper here. They put the reference of that paper, but the original one was another paper. Normally, authors try to better explain themselves by copying some good sentences from others and putting references at the end. So they think that it is okay. But when we face like this and we say that please try to write these sentences with your own words, but it is not so easy to paraphrase it, and you have seen from the previous examples. So what I said then was to translate this sentence into Turkish and left them for some time, and then back translate it in English. Then you will have a sentence with your own words. But I was wondering whether this technique is good to prevent plagiarism. And we did a study among Turkish scientists, and we sent them sentences from New England Journal of Medicine and want them to translate them into Turkish. And after 2 months, later back into English. What we have found that, and then we also sent those sentences to editors whose mother language is English, and they edited those sentences, and then we asked them to evaluate those sentences with the previous one and also with the original one. And we found that back translation resulted in 16% of the sentences losing their important scientific meaning with this method. Although editing significantly improved the meaning, however, still important scientific meaning was not retained in 10% of those sentences. We found back translation did not result in acceptable paraphrasing in nearly 70% of the sentences, and the sentences had a mean of 78 duplicate content. Then we conclude that back translation alone does not avoid technical plagiarism. Further editing improves the meaning and decreases the rate of duplicate content. However, acceptable paraphrasing still may not be achieved. So you can imagine the difficulty of our authors in writing in English. So what can you simply advise to authors who try to write in English? Should we attend to English lessons again, or what is the easiest way to learn it better and not to make any mistake?
That's a very big question. I mean, it is really difficult because, as Anna, as an editor, I don't have any problem with authors lifting sentences which are well written from other sources, because you're showing knowledge in as much as you recognise that that is a well-constructed sentence. And so long as it's expressing your own research, I don't have a problem with it. The difficulty is, I mean, some editors do have a problem because they're not very good at dealing with authors. But it is beholden on the authors to be transparent, to say that we've copied these phrases because these are completely, these are the suitable phrases for what we're trying to say. But I believe it is an intractable problem, and I don't think there is an easy answer at all, because asking people to paraphrase doesn't necessarily improve things, and the translation method, that won't improve things as well, because Google has certain rules that it uses for it. To be honest, I don't know if there is a solution in the short term, certainly not an easy one.
Yeah, and especially now with this strict definition. For me, the first iteration where they just kind of slightly rearranged the sentence, for me that would be acceptable. Well, how else? You see that it got complicated and obfuscated and really not much better, or even worse. It became much worse than it was originally written. So what's the point of that? Because the point of scientific communication, that it's clear and simple so that other people can understand it and use it and see that some research was good. And if you write it in that way that was suggested as the best, the most appropriate way of paraphrasing, where does it lead you? To long, unreadable manuscripts? Yeah. So I don't know, and I am for integrity. I mean, I do research on integrity, I teach integrity, but there is a limit where it becomes much.
I think actually I have a very good quote. In fact, the research that I did in the summer has been into an article that last week was accepted for publication. And Professor Uzum is quoted in the article with his permission and fully cited. But also I have another quote from Dr. Farouk from Iran, who also works on research integrity. And in fact, if I could ask somebody to bring me the piece of paper, because it was on my presentation, I'd like to read it to you, because I think he makes a very good point. Is it just, it's on that desk.
On the other table.
That desk. My apologies for this. So Professor Farouk said, I for one believe that plagiarism of text, not the idea, would be acceptable. Unlike literature, where wording is the essence of the work, in scientific writing, the wording is just a medium carrying the scientific message to be conveyed. Here, the scientific message is the essence of the work, no matter how eloquently it is presented. And I think he makes a very good point for saying it's not the phrasing or the text that is a problem, it is the idea that is a problem. And authors must have original ideas and original research and original results and original discussion and original conclusions, but the words that you express those with are not a problem. And so if you find something that is expressed properly, then you can use that. But it needs to be cited or quoted or at least acknowledged to the editor, so the editor can then advise you how best to present that.
I would like to ask Anna, who is an... Is she the chairman of a department or a colleague who needs publication for academic career or statistician? What about radiologists who evaluated the computer tomographies or pathologists who evaluated the PCMs? What about the person collecting data? Should be an author, and if not, who should be a technologist?
Okay, so the answer to all of your questions here is no, theoretically. Because, at least in medicine, we have this definition from the International Committee of Medical Journals Editors, which has 4 criteria. So you have to contribute to the idea and execution of research. That's one criterion. So either idea or doing research. And you have to write, whether it's a draft of the article or revisions of this article, but substantive revision, not saying you need to use calligraphy font instead of Times Roman and make margins 3 centimeters and not 2. That's not intellectual revision of the article. Everybody has to agree on the manuscript version that is submitted, and the 4th requirement is that everybody takes the kind of responsibility for the whole article. So this is the ideal authorship, but we know that it doesn't happen in the real world. And there are studies that show that people do know about this definition, but nobody follows it. And when you do studies asking actual researchers, and this was a qualitative study done at the NIH, you see that they award authorship on different criteria. Their role towards their younger colleagues, exchange, so you give me your antibody and I give you my mice, and then, I have to give you something back, if you give me your antibody, and that's authorship. And that it's not easy to have a single answer. And also what comes from research that has been done, and we also did, that the answers to these questions will not be solved by rules. So we did a study where we had students being taught these criteria and other students that were not taught, and we asked them some kind of cases of authorship and their decision whether a person who is kind of vague, doesn't fit the criteria, but you have a moral right to give this person authorship, or he gave an idea and got sick and couldn't finish the research and write the paper, but without his idea there wouldn't be any research. And you see that people make decisions on authorship based on moral grounds, and they use rules to justify their decision, to rationalize it. Okay? And also you have practices of the community, and it's very difficult to fight. For example, for me, people say, if you were a clinician who was part of a clinical trial and you just cared for patients and you found those patients and you didn't do research and didn't write the paper, you don't have the right to be an author. But without that clinician, there wouldn't be any trial, because that person was instrumental in recruiting patients, taking care of them, so that the research is successful. So why such person who was crucial for the outcome, general outcome of that experiment, wouldn't be an author? And that's why, for example, now the ICMJ says these are the 4 criteria, but we recommend that to people who satisfy one criterion, so they contributed to research in some way, but they didn't contribute writing, or wasn't planned that they contribute, that they are offered to satisfy all criteria, so that their contribution could be formalized into an authorship. And there are experiments that show that if you plan in advance, I'm talking about prevention all the time, there have been studies that show that if you think about authorship as a part of your research plan, so you have a protocol for a controlled trial, so part of this protocol is authorship plan. You say, we start this with this plan, you're going to do that, the chair is going to do that, this is me, and this is provisionary order of the byline of us. And then we go, and after each certain time periods, we revisit this. No, I couldn't do that, sorry, like you explained it to another example. Sorry, I do not really think that I should be an author, you didn't contribute enough, we will put you in acknowledgement. So you revise this so that everybody knows what is going on and everybody agrees beforehand on what the procedure will be. In that case, everybody here except the second person could be an author. Only chairman, because without a chairman and maybe he gives you extra room, extra time, gives you extra lab space, you can use the chemicals that he got from his project. Yeah. But by default, having someone as an author or a chairman as an author, that's also not good. also, but the person who needs publication for academic career, I'd rather say, okay, why didn't you come to me before we started this paper? Well, let's work on another paper, and then we'll work together, and you will have a good paper for your career. This is like, you know, I'm a professor of anatomy, and very often colleagues call me at the end of the academic year, last exam, saying, look, my child has problems with anatomy and he's flunking all the exams. So why didn't you call me before the anatomy course and ask me, look out for my child? And I would do that, you know, and maybe, you know, be more strict and then make sure that that student learns, instead of trying to remedy something post-fact when it's finished. Better to make a plan how to help a colleague who needs a publication, because you will do two things. You will have a collaborator and you will teach and guide somebody to really do research and not just to be given a publication. Statisticians, yes, if they're not paid. If you pay a statistician and they want you to put them on paper, I don't think that's acceptable. You cannot have both, what we say, money and the sheep. You either have money or the sheep. So that's not the same. Without a radiologist or pathologist who did a lot of work on assessing your samples in a trial, it's all up to an agreement, but beforehand, I would say.
Can I chip in with a slight difference of opinion?
Yes.
If you could just change the word author to contributor, then it would change, because the chairman has a role, maybe not the colleague who needs the publication, but the statistician, definitely the radiologist. I'm not sure about the pathologists, but the person collecting the data. And there is a move called Credit, which is trying to get journals to move away from the idea of authorship, because there are a lot of people have problems with the ICMJE fourth criteria, particularly the big researchers. And in fact, in my journal, we've just published an article arguing against the fourth criteria. And this move is trying to move towards the idea of contributorship, so that everybody who is named as an author on an article actually has a discrete role. So the chairman would be named, but would be named under the person that obtained the funding. And the statistician would be named as the person that did a statistical review, so that people have a specific role that then entitles them to be named on that article.
Are they named as authors or contributors? Let me disagree. Because, you know, this contributorship comes from medicine, where they said, let's do away with authors, let's just write who did what, and it's up to whoever reads or any evaluation committee to decide, you know, who is an author and who deserves promotion or whatever. And it was Drummond Rennie, as you know. But then they say, oh yeah, we wanted to do with authorship, but it's not possible because it's important for people's advancement. So what does it mean for somebody to be a contributor? If you're a chairman and you're appearing there in acknowledgement as a contributor and you're not on the byline, what good does it do to me? I cannot use it for promotion. If you have to change the whole system for that to work. And contributorship was proposed in 1997, so it's 21 years now of contributorship talk, and it hasn't worked anywhere.
Okay. Check out the January issue of Learned Publisher.
Okay, and let me just tell you about credit. It puts you in boxes, and we have shown in our research, which used randomized trials, is the way you ask is the way you're going to get the answer. If you ask people to tick boxes, they will think only in these boxes, and you will not get a true information about what they really did. So you have to have open-ended, you know, this is from psychometry, from psychological research, how people fill in surveys or questions about self-reported behavior. And we have shown clearly in an experimental situation that it doesn't work.
But don't you already have authors? Because somebody puts themselves down as an author and the other authors agree, but you as an editor or a reader don't know what they did.
contributorship arises only when you have lots of authors. When you ask up to three authors for contributions, you may even get that they don't even fulfill their criteria, because for them it's like, what you're asking, I'm the author of this, and you're asking me what I did. They don't get it. Only when you get over 6 authors or something, then this need for justification comes in, that you justify the role. So we in Croatian Medical Journal decided, you just tell me why you think you should be the author of the study. We will publish this, and this is the record, and then it's for you, because we as editors shouldn't be deciding who the author is. We should be publishing what they say. And it's up to someone who reads that they say, okay, we think that what this person did in this research is worthy of, counting for the promotion and becoming a professor. Why should we as editors be the guardians of authorship when we don't know what actually happened in the institutions with this piece of research? Just tell us what you think. What is your agreement? We'll publish that. And then it's up to you to justify, think, value, promote, but don't put yourself into boxes. I can write it for your journal about that if you want. Sorry, I don't know how exciting this is for you, but you obviously see that we are enjoying it a lot.
I think we should close the panel now and ask for the questions.
If you have any questions or later on come tomorrow during the breaks, please ask us. We'd love to answer.
Can you, after that?
Thank you for this good panel. I want to ask a question about the ocean. In Turkey, in the national medical journals, it's not rare to see articles with authors from different centers. I mean, multi-center studies. But sometimes they have even case reports or experimental studies, not clinical trials. What do you think about this? I know that there are organized publication events in Turkey, maybe in the developing countries, but you don't have evidence to claim them. What do you think about multi-centered studies or articles?
I think, that you cannot say that it would only apply to clinical research. I come from experimental science, laboratory science, so, I may ask Pippa to do a Western blot for me in her lab, because I don't have these facilities, so I will send my samples to her. And then I will send something for Northern blot, and I have somebody to genotype this. So, especially, this is what is growing, because, you would collaborate with lots of people on a research, especially if it's good research and published in a good journal. On the other hand, when you look at some communities, it's all about what community decides. I have been a part of these genome-wide association scans, which are genetic detecting of gene polymorphism. And the rule in that community is, because you cannot work from a single country, you have to have Shetland Islands somewhere there in Scotland, you have to have some isolated villages in North Germany, or people from, Australia or New Zealand, and you have to have thousands of samples in order to make your research valid. So with them, the rule is if each 1,000 samples that you bring in, it's 4 authors on the byline. Because, it's such a big effort, and you have to honor all of these people that went around and collected 1,000 blood samples for gene analysis, that the rules are different. I think we will see a greater variety of authorship rules, and I think they are all acceptable as long as they are transparent, that people in collaborating in different labs, I say, Pippa did this, I did that, I'm responsible for this and that. And it's clear, whatever you write is fine, and whatever you declare, because it's your declaration, and we shouldn't be guessing who did what.
Please.
I would like to share some experience with this so-called recently
object computerized software for plagiarism identification. For instance, in a normal introduction of paper, one can say that breast cancer is the most common malignant disease in the world. But take into consideration that about 10,000 papers have been entered only in public headline dealing with breast cancer epidemiology. At least 100 authors' papers should be cited after this sentence. And next, in a foreign paper, submitted by my World Journal, etc., series, they identified as plagiarism, for instance, the word manuscript number, because it is included in the submission form. Then title number included, and then several sentences ended by in bracket some number, because they require not name of author and year, they require only number, because number is normal. And then they say, it's some but this was has been published. In that website, this sentence will publish. I cite correctly a number, it means that I have cited this publication, properly cited behind the reference list, but then I have identified. I know that there is no only secondary referencing we mentioned. There's tertiary, etc., and one sentence becomes cited not by 1,000, but 1,000 authors. Like Rogan, 50,000, 60,000 times cited a paper of an author. World champion in citation. He personally answered that this is not the best paper of him, but was cited. You know. Now I would like to say, you have some imagination how this system is rooted also in Bulgaria, has been controlled by some way, because it is said you have 14% plagiarism. Probably I have 1%, probably, but not 14. And this says 90%, they are cost paper, they are totally. For some 5 or 6 graphs, we are probably cited to receive 12%. It's stupid, I think. Politely spoken, strange.
Thank you very much for this. I think we talk that we should educate authors, but I think editors have to get educated first in this. And I don't know, I've been attending World Conference on Research Integrity where there is a talk about this, how to deal with it. And all that publishers and editors ask, so what's the number? You know, what's the number? Is 18%? Is 19%? And then we say, well, does it mean the 19.1 is and 19 isn't? So that's a big problem. And for example, when your first experience about citing one study, although they would have to study, to quote 100 studies, that's what usually in journals is dealt with, that it's required that you cite a most recent systematic review or literature review and say, what we know in this field, what is the latest knowledge is this. So you don't have to cite everything, but you cite a review, especially if it is a systematic review, that would be better synthesis of evidence. So it is difficult, and if editors don't know how to read the output from plagiarism check, I think that's the worst thing, both for them and for the editors, because it decreases trust in editors.
Any other questions?
I would like to give a little feedback of the student view of these ethics, like education and science ethics. Most of the time, it's not seeing how it affects the students. I want to give an example. I've seen both the course of German Ecole and the Turkish Ecole. In our literature lessons, I mean the Turkish one, we are learning history of the literature, like the authors and the other stuff. It's the beginning of the scientific writing, actually, like the essays, the articles and you give a thesis, and then you find the pro and the contra effects, and then you write a conclusion. But that's not the Turkish version. But what I've seen in, for example, the German echo, then there you have to always give the reason, these citations, and it affects you. One day we had to write a summarize about the Catcher in the Rye and Catcher in the Rye, and one of my friends wrote a really, really good summary of it. And when I read it, I was like, oh my God, she's gonna get a really high note, better than me. But the next day we found out that she got 0. I was really shocked, and our teacher explained that she made plagiarism, but not directly to us. We found out later on. But that was a really good example for us, because we never tried something like that again. No one. It's like copying or cheating for Turkish students. It's common. Like, it's sometimes even funny. But with one of that example, that was just the point. Nobody tried to do something like that again. Thank you.
And I think you raise an important point there, is when you're, when people are learning, you rely on, I mean, in England we refer to the carrot and the stick. So the carrot is what you hang in front of the donkey to make the donkey move forward, and the stick is what you beat the donkey with to make the donkey move forward. And so you want to give people a reward for behaving well, you want to give them a penalty for behaving badly, but you need to make sure that that within their peer group, their peers will actually judge them, because that makes more difference than the institution judging them. So if your colleagues are telling you, you stole this? How could you do that? That has much greater impact than getting a penalty through your institution, because that gives you, so for the future, you're trying, because you want to be liked by your colleagues and you're respected by them. And so what you said there is learning from one of your colleagues being penalised, and that lowers that colleague in your estimation, and it also makes you think, I don't want to be that person, so I don't want to do the same thing as them and get the same criticism. So with training, you need to look at all of those things to get people to do the right thing.
Thank you very much. We have to close now. Rector is waiting for us. Thank you very much for participation.